Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading John Locke's second treatise, Government. Last time we finished chapter 6, which was on paternal power. Today we're going to be doing chapter 7, which deals with of political or civil society. Okay, this is a little shorter than the last one, but this is a long chapter. This is the sixth longest chapter in the book. Um, this has 18 chapters. If the last chapter we had 25 sections, sorry, it's 25 sections, not 20 chapters. Um, was the fourth largest. Six was paternal power was and that came after the third largest, which is chapter 5 on property. So we've had it's decreasing the size of the thing. So we went from the third, the fourth largest, now to the sixth largest. But then after this, in chapter 8, we'll get second largest. These been these last couple chapters have been really long and longer than I would like to do videos for. But my goal is to kind of keep every video a chapter of itself. Uh, as you know, we're using this Google version. Someone said to me, "Are you sure it's not been edited? That it's no, this is almost the original text of Locke. The spelling has not been changed. It's the language of this. I probably should maybe go through it with more care. I should have used the last edition to be absolutely certain about it that this was not a kind of a edits have not been added into this by some because the Locke has one of these problems of having so many different varieties that that how do you know that this is like which edition this is? And Lassett's edition and some of the other ones that I used, I mentioned in the thing below, are based on Lassett's. Um, so, except the Ellis, which is again that's the first oldest 17th first English translation. Sorry, Ellis is not Aristotle. I think Ellis. Why did I mention Ellis? Sorry. Brain is going a little foggy for a second. Let's go look at this. Right, section 77. God having made man such a creature that in his own judgment it was not good for him to be alone, but put him under strong obligation of necessity, convenience, and inclination to drive him into society, as well as fitted him with the understanding and language to continue and enjoy it. Okay, so therefore, um, the first society was that between man and wife, which gave beginning to that between parents and children, to which in time that between master and servant came to be added, and through all these might and commonly did meet together and make up one family, wherein the master or mistress of it had some sort of rule proper of a family. Each of these altogether came short of political society, as we shall see, if we consider the different ends, ties, and bounds of each of these. So he says that once you have family, you have society. Okay, and that men are bound into this. And this again, this sounds like Aristotle here. Okay, then if there's society, then there's always society. But he seems to distinguish between society per se, or this familiar society, and political society. These are two different things, or civil society, political or civil society, as distinguished from paternal society. Okay, uh, but the family is a form of society. He says. Okay, well, if the family is a form of society, it's a different kind of society outside that is inferior to, or not inferior to, but different than political society in that sense, right? It came short of political society. Conjugal society. Now, I think this is the relationship between husband and wife. Conjugal, no, conjugal, sexy. Uh, Conjugal society is made by voluntary compact between men and women. Okay, but the family is not. Although the husband and wife relationship is voluntary to some degree, the children are not voluntary in that sense, and family in this larger sense, right? And though it consists chiefly in such a communion in right in one another's bodies as is necessary to the chief end, procreation, it draws to a mutual support and assistance and a communion of interest too, as necessity not only to unite their care and affection, but also to their common offspring, who have a right to be nourished and maintained by them till they are able to provide for themselves. So it seems, in other words, he's saying that there's a bond, there's a thing, the conjugal society that does it, and therefore this we need to care because this brings us to enjoy each other's bodies and things. For the sake of this produces children, and we have obligations to make sure that they're cared for until they are able to be of their own. But does that end the relationship between man and wife? No. The conjugal society is conjugal society only for the sake of like procreation, and then that. In other words, in other words, is there more to marriage than just conjugal? Okay, is there friendship? Is there something there, a bond or a communion that is beyond mere conjugal relations for the purpose of conjugal relations and the purpose of procreation? What's going here? In other words, their main. In other words, so the conjugal society 78 gets us to the situation where the common offspring who have the right to be nourished and maintained to them until they're able to provide themselves. Right? 79 for the end of conjunction between man and female being not barely procreation, but the continuation of the species. This conjunction betwixt male and female ought to last even after procreation, so long as it is necessary for the nourishment and support of the young, who are to be sustained even after procreation, so long as it is necessary for the nourishment and support of the young ones, who are to be sustained by those that got them, till they are able to shift and provide for themselves. This rule, with the infinite wise makers hath set to the works of his hand, we find the inferior creatures steadily obey. In those viperious animals which feed on grass, the conjunction between male and female lasts no longer than the act of copulation, because the teat of the dam being sufficient to nourish the young, till it be able to feed on grass. By male, the male only begets, but concerns not himself for the female or young, to whose sustenance he can contribute nothing. But in beasts of prey, the conjunction lasts longer, because the dam, not being able well to subsist herself and nourish her numerous offspring by her own prey alone, more laborious as well as more dangerous way of living than by feeding on grass, and assistance of the male is necessary for the maintenance of their common family, which cannot subsist till they are able to pray for themselves, but by the joint care of male and female. The same is to be observed in all birds, except some domestic ones, where plenty of food excuses the cock from feeding and caring for the young brood, whose young needs food and in the nest, and the cock and the hen continue mates till the young are able to use their wings and provide for themselves. So, in other words, this is the idea that certain birds are, if domesticated birds, who, because there's so much food available, the cock or the male doesn't pay attention to getting food for them. He only pays attention to just making more. Okay. The rooster are doing his activity, right? Um, Section 80. And hence, I think, lies the chief, if not only reason why the male and the female in mankind are tied to a longer conjunction than other creatures, viz., because the female is capable of conceiving and de facto is commonly with child again and bringing forth to a new birth long before the former is out of dependency for support of his parents' help and is able to shift for himself, and has all the assistance is due to him from his parents, whereby the father, who is bound to take care for those he hath begot, is under an obligation to continue in conjugal society with the same woman longer than other creatures, whose young, besides able to subsist for themselves, before the time of procreation returns after conjugal bond dissolve of themselves, they are at liberty, all till Hymen, as his usual anniversary, sees and summons them again to choose new mates. Okay, so in other words, okay, what's going on here? Um, all the time purgation returns again, conjugal bond dissolves of itself, where they're at liberty till Hymen at his usual anniversary summons them to choose new mates, wherein one cannot but admire the wisdom of the great Creator, who has given to man foresight and the ability to lay up for the future, as well as to supply the present necessity, hath made it necessary that society of man and should wife should be more lasting than of male and female among the other creatures, so that their industry might be encouraged, and that their interest better united, to make provision and lay goods for their common usage, which uncertain mixture or easy frequent solutions of conjugal society might would mightly disturb. In other words, okay, if in other words, by staying in a same male female relationship and therefore having stability here, what happens? You're able to, instead of you're going to build more. Your industry, both the husband and wife can engage in products that allows what? Well, the male can be industrious. The female, it becomes a division of labor, in which therefore the industry can be maximized. Each party is able to maximize their capacity to be industrious, and thus able to do what? Able to produce and leave more for their offspring and their future, their progeny, that their children are able to enjoy this. Right. This is the idea here, and therefore, if whereas if after every junction of this they broke off and created new ones, there'd be no and that everyone had to do it, start from scratch every time. There would be no investment, no development. We kind of see this in the situation of the urban community, when there's you know men have children with women have children with many men, and men have children with many wives. What happens is there's often poverty here. Why? Unless there's this kind of a situation where one man has all these wives, but he has wealth first. His wealth and power makes it possible that he has as many wives. But in a situation where you have this situation where people just have children with that, and they, different baby mama, different baby papa, um, um, creates a condition that there's no investment. It's hard for people to invest in other words, if you're going to have to care for many wives, unless you have already wealth, it's going to be hard for you to generate wealth in that sense. So Locke seems to suggest that the idea of maintaining the conjugal bond longer, while it happens also because of children happening like this, but it's also there is a benefit for the parties, that by staying together they're able to produce more and leave more industry. They're able to do more than this other situation. That's actually, so therefore giving us the foresight, right? This is to lay up the future as well as supply the present necessity has made it necessary for society, men and wife, should be more lasting than that of the other creatures, right? Um, so that their industry might be encouraged and that their interests better united to make provisions and lay up goods for their common use, while in certain mixture or easy or frequent solutions or the dissolutions of the conjugal society might easily disturb. 81. But though, but those, but though these are the ties upon mankind, which makes the conjugal bond more firm and lasting in man than in other species of animals, yet it would give one reason to inquire why this compact, when procreation and education are secured, the inheritance taken care of, may not be made determinable either by consent or at a certain time upon certain conditions, as well as any other voluntary compacts, there being no necessity in the nature of the thing, nor to the end of it, that it should always be for life. I mean, to such as are under no restraint of any positive law which ordains such contracts to be perpetual. So, why is it perpetual? Why is this? Why? Now, the argument is that is it is there some reason? But the husband and wife, though they have but one common concern, yet having different understandings, will unavoidably sometimes have different wills too. It therefore being necessary that the last determination, i.e., the rule, should be placed somewhere. If it finally falls to the man's share, as the abler and more and stronger, but this reaching, but this reaching, but to the things of their common interest and property, leaves the wife in the full and free possession of what by contract is her peculiar right, and gives the husband no more power over her life than she has over his. The power of the husband being so far from that of an absolute monarch, that the wife has in many cases a liberty to separate from him where natural right or their custom allow it, whether that contract be made by themselves in the state of nature or by the customs of the law of the country they live in. And the children upon such separation fall to the father or the mother's lot, as such contract does determine. So what is he saying here? What happens when they separate? There's no absolute bond of husband and wife. There seems to be that they are able to stay together until there's a point, and then if the wife wishes does not want to be this, that she leaves and separate, then the family separates. He seems to suggest here. This is okay. This is a little more flexible. Locke is a far more flexible model of marriage in that sense, right? Liberty to separate from him when natural right or a contract allows it, where whether that contract be made by themselves in the state of nature or by the customs of law of the country they live under. And the children, upon such separation, fall to the father or the mother's lot, as such contract as determined. So the contract would have to determine. What is the contract between them? The marriage contract, the child contract. What's going on here? Is the contract created by this nature? Okay, but something's going wrong here. What is nature? You know, how would the nature contract? Well, usually look at this is, again for all. Let's go. I mean, this is a very big problem. I think the dissolution of the marriage creates a problem in the sense of this of the relationship. If she doesn't want to be there, let's say separating like this, they're not going to go. They're not going to maintain each other. They want to separate. They don't. This is because the parties don't want it anymore. Okay, this is a contractual, or the contract is ended. Even though the children, they have obligations to care for them, but how they're divided, who takes care of them? Well, there's mutual. The children, both parties have a mutual obligation to them, as we said before, right? Of care and concern. So therefore, they both would have to, under the previous discussion of paternal power, um, would require to maintain the care and thing of the child. That would be true in both natural society, the natural state of nature, as well as in the state of society, right? So, okay, what's going on here? What's such contract determined? So, nothing can be said here cannot be. You have to go back and apply what was said earlier. Section 83: for all the ends of marriage being to obtain but under public government, as well as the state of nature, the civil magistrate does not abridge the right or power or of either naturally necessary to those ends, viz., procreation, mutual support, and assistance while they are together, but only decides any controversy that may arise between man and his wife about them. So, in other words, the civil authority does not determine the relationship of them being together like this. It only determines the being of any controversy or dispute that has. Because, okay, this is okay, right? And if it were otherwise, and that absolute sovereignty and power of life and death naturally belong to the husband, and were necessary to the society between man and wife, where could be no there could be no matrimony in any of those countries where the husband is allowed no such absolute authority. But the end of matrimony requiring not such power in the husband, the condition of conjugal society put it not in him, it being not at all necessary to that state. Conjugal society would subsist and attain its ends without it. Nay, community of goods and the powers over them, mutual assistance and maintenance, and other things belong to conjugal society, might be varied and regulated by that contract which unites man and wife in that society, as far as it consists with procreation and the bringing up of children till they can shift for themselves. Nothing being necessary to any society that is not necessary to the ends for which it is made. In other words, society needs in other words, no children, no society. In other words, so society makes rules. Why? For the perpetuation of that society. So therefore, they make the rules and the contract, how the contracts will be regulated, will be for the ensuring that there is a future system. There's the good of the children who will have offsprings and who have developed the future, the next, the progeny, so that there will be a society in that sense. So therefore, it is, in other words, it is not necessity to the ends that which made it. So therefore, those things. What is the ends? Their perpetuation, right? So therefore, the well-being and that children able to themselves have children and to develop further things. 84. The society betwixt parents and children, and the distinct rights and powers belonging respecting to them, I have treated so largely in the foregoing chapter that I shall not here need to say anything of it. And I think it's plain that it is far different. And I think it's plain that it is far different. Um, um, and I think it is plain that it is far different from a politic society. Master and servants are names as old as history, but given to those of far different conditions. For a free man makes himself a servant to another by selling him for a certain time the service he undertakes to do, in exchange for wages he is to receive. And though he commonly puts him in the family of his master, and under the ordinary discipline thereof, yet it gives the master only a temporary power over him, and no greater than what is contained in the contract between them. But there is another sort of servant, which by the particular use we call slaves, whose being captives taken in a just war, are by the right of nature subjected to absolute dominion and arbitrary power of their masters. For these men, having, as I say, forfeited their lives and their liberties, and lost their estates, and being in the state of slavery, are not capable of any property, cannot in that state be considered any part of civil society, their chief end, the chief end of which is the preserving of property. In other words, whoa, the chief end of civil society, in other words, the chief end of civil society is the perpetuation of property, right? So slaves are not part of it. They are property. They're not part of society. They really remember that remember what he says about slavery all the way back then, earlier. They're also in a state of war. In other words, that technically, that by the laws of nature and the laws of nature, that that no one has the right to have absolute dominion. You might have broken the law. I could have killed. I had the power to kill you. I decide not to for my benefit. Um, um, it does. In other words, it's too risky to give you your freedom. Um, Again, this slavery is once weird because it does at one time earlier slavery was absolute power and dominion, but then in that case everyone's at war with each other and there's no obligation to obey, and you know uh, and the second you disobey you're killed. Okay, then it reverts back to that. um, this is but again, this is the very line. This is the chief end of society is preservation of property. 86. Let us therefore consider a master of a family with all those subordinate relations of wife, children, servants, slaves, united under the domestic rule of family, which what resembles soever it may have in another, in its orders, offices, and numbers too, with a little commonwealth. Yet it is far from it, both in its constitution, power, and ends. Or it must be, or it, if it must be, for if it must be thought a monarchy and a paternal familias, the absolute monarch in it, absolute monarchy will have but a very shattered and short power, when it is plain by what has been said before, that the master of the family has very distinct and different limited power, both as to time and extent, over the different over the several persons that are in and for accepting the slave. In the family is as much a family, and the power as paternal familiar says is great, whether there be any slaves in his family or no. He has no legislative power of life over death over any of them, and none too but what a mistress of a family may have as well as he. And he certainly can have no absolute power over the whole family, who has but a very limited one over every other individual in it. But how a family or any other society of men differ from that which is properly called political society, we shall we shall best see by concerning wherein political society itself consists. So, in other words, how do we? Now he's now saying that this political society and families are different, and then for the under political society, we must see how it is consists. Right. But this leaves us now to section 87. Man being born, as had been proved, with the title to perfect freedom, and an uncontrolled enjoyment of all the rights and privileges of the law of nature, equally with any other man or number of men in the world, hath by nature a power not only to preserve his property, but that of his life, liberty, and estate against the injuries and attempts of other men, but to judge and punish the breaches of the law in others, as he is persuaded the offense deserves, even with death itself in crimes where the heinousness of the fact and his opinion require it. But because no political society can be or subsist without having in itself the power to preserve the property, or and in order thereunto punish the offenses of all those that society of those of that society, there and there only is political society. where every one of the members have quitted this natural power, resigned it up to the hands of the community, in all cases that excludes him from appealing for protection to the law established by it. And thus, all private judgments of every particular member being excluded, the community comes up. The community comes to be umpire by settling by settled standing rules, indifferent, the same the same to all parties, and by men having authority from the community for the execution of those rules, decided all the differences that may happen between any member of that society concerning any matter of right, and punished those offenses which any members have committed against society, with such penalties as the law has established, whereby it is easy to discern who are and who are not in political society together. Okay, this is okay. Well, here, now, first of all, notice that Locke seems to treat society and community interchangeably. He seeks that they seem to be synonyms with no meaningful difference. Which the Latin is not. That's not true with the Latin. And that's not true with how the Greeks understood community, and the Latins how to understood community and society. Locke seems to conflate them as one and treat them interchangeably. Okay. Here, in other words, now what's happening in civil society is what in nature every man is left to himself to judge what is right and wrong. Okay. What happens in civil society become that we create a situation where we create a body politic, and the bodies are the agents created by that common entity will become the judge, and the society becomes the empire, and the representative, the magistrates in those bodies who act as the agent to act as empire that you turn to execute these things, um, become how can I say become kind of the mechanism to resolve these questions and disputes. What in the state of nature, every man has only himself as the executive authority. Here in civil society, the executive authority is created by law, established by the community, and that there's these that the rules that are set up for that govern these issues are equally applied to all, right? And decides all the differences that may happen between any member that on society may concern matters of right, punishes those offenses which have any member have commanded against society, and such penalties as the law established, whereby it is easy to discern who are and who are not in political society together. Okay, so those who are united in one body and have a common established law and judicature to appeal to, whose authority to decide controversies between them and punish offenses are in civil society with one another. But those who have no such common appeal, and I mean on earth, are still in the state of nature, each being where there is no other judge for himself, an executioner again for himself, which is, as I have before shown, the perfect state of nature. So therefore, in the state of nature, there's no one there to be as established as the judge and executioner. That every man is left for himself to be the judge and executioner. In political society, the political society establishes someone who has, and everyone in there is under those laws and under the jurisdiction of that who has been set in authority to act as judge and executor, the executive, right? 88. And thus the Commonwealth comes by a power to set down what punishment shall belong to the several transgressions, which I think worthy of it, committed amongst the members of that society, which is the power of making laws. And well, it is as well as it has the power to punish any injury done unto it, unto done unto any of its members by anyone that is not of it, which is the power of war and peace, right? So therefore, they have punished those who break within the power. This is law, the right of making rules amongst those who are within it. That's the right of law. They're able to punish those with injuries who are not members of it. This is war and peace, and uh, 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 and all and all of this for the preservation of the property of the members of the society, as far as possible. But though every man who has entered into civil society and is become a member of any commonwealth has thereby quitted his power to punish offenses against the laws of nature in prosecution of his own private judgment, yet with the judgments of offenses, he has given up to the legislature. In other words, regarding judgments of these offenses, right? He has given up to the legislature in all cases where he can appeal to the magistrate. In other words, again, when he can appeal to a magistrate, those cases were, in other words, the cases that where there's no appeal to a magistrate, he retains it. The argument goes. But in other words, let's continue. But though every man who has entered into civil society and becomes a member of any commonwealth has whereby quitted his power to punish offenses, the offenses that you had, you could, in a state of nature, people commit crimes against you. You're the executive. Now you're not the executive. Okay, therefore you against the laws of nature, right? In prosecution of his own private judgment. Okay, in other words, these things are no longer in civil society. These are no longer your authority. You've surrendered these issues of, okay, what are the punishments going to be, and whether before you decided you were the judge. Now there's going to be a judge who judges it, and there's going to be law determining what the punishment is and what the thing is to be done, and the punishment will be done by the under the law, by and sometimes executed by the enforcement of the law will be done by the executive, agents of the Commonwealth, magistrates, right? In other words, and as long as you can appeal to the magistrate, he has given a right to the Commonwealth to employ his force for the execution of the judgments of the Commonwealth, wherever he or whenever he shall be called to it, which indeed are his own judgments, they're being made by himself or his representative. So in other words, they were his by his creating in that or his representative, those who made the law, right? And where herein we have the original of the legislative and executive power of civil society, which is the judge by standing laws how the offenses are to be punished when committed within the Commonwealth, and also to determine by occasional judgments found on present circumstances of facts how far injuries from without are to be vindicated, and in both of these to employ all the force of the members when they shall be needed. In other words, what happens when someone harms the industry of this? Well, in other words, how far do we going to respond to do this? How much force we'll need to do this? And if we're going to have to do this, we have the right to use the members, people of that society, to and how much of them we're going to need in their labor or their actions in order to punish the harm that has been done. Okay, right? 89. Wherever, therefore, any number of men are so united in one society as to quit every one and as to quit every one his executive powers of the law of nature, and to resign it to the public. There and there only is the political and civil society. So, civil society, political or civil society, is where that people have surrendered and given up their right of executive power in the state of nature. In other words, And this is done wherever any number of men in the state of nature enter into society to make one people, one body politic under one supreme government, or else when anyone joins himself to and incorporates with any government already made. For hereby he authorizes the society, or which is all one, the legislative therein, to make laws for him, as the public good of the society shall require, to the execution whereof his assistance as to his own decrees is due. And this puts men out of the state of nature into that of a commonwealth, by setting up a judge on earth with authority to determine all the controversies and redress the injuries that may happen to any member of the commonwealth, which judge is the legislature or magistrates appointed by it. So the judges is what? The legislature or the magistrate is appointed by the legislature. And wherever there are any number of men, however associated, that have no such decisive power to appeal to, there they are still in the state of nature. If you have no one to appeal, if men are in a situation where they have no one to appeal to deal with this problem, right? And wherever there are any number of men, however associated, that have no such decisive power to appeal to, they are still in the state of nature. So there's no ultimate power that you can appeal to that can resolve, to punish, to decide a controversy, to punish a wrongdoing or harm, and to enforce decisions I've agreed to. This is, no matter what forms of association, this is still in the state of nature. So when the civil authorities don't enforce the law and don't act in their obligation to enforce the law, for Locke, that situation is the state of nature now, because you have no one to appeal to. In other words, if you appeal for on deaf ears and they do not, and you're and not being, okay, this is hence it is evident that absolute monarchy, which by some men is counted the only government in the world, is indeed inconstant with civil society, and so can be no form of civil government at all. For the end of civil society being to avoid and remedy those inconveniences of the state of nature, which necessary follow from every man's being judged in his own case, by setting up a known authority to which every one of that society may appeal upon any injury received or controversy that may arise, and which every one of the society might obey. And there's the dot and there's the note here, right? Wherever any person are who have not such authority to appeal to, for the decision of any deference between them, those persons are still in the state of nature, and so is every absolute prince in respect to those who are under his dominion. So therefore, if you have an absolute prince, then your arbitrary rule and arbitrary decision. This means that there's no civil society. There's no this right to appeal, and there's like this, and there's constant. There is this sense that, in other words, there is a rule that society may appeal to and receive, and controversies may, in which everyone in the society is abide. Even the prince has to abide by it, and even the rulers have to abide by it. Everyone has to abide by it, wherever the present are, and who are not, and again, who have not such an authority to appeal to for such a decision of any difference between them. Those persons are still in the state of nature. So if you have a situation, therefore, if a prince is not obliged to obey the decisions and rules that he's made, that has been decided, a prince can say, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to, yes, you appeal to me, but no, I'm not going to do this. I don't want it. It's not my interest. Then what's happening is where everyone is Locke seems to suggest that is a state of nature then. So absolute rule puts ultimately, that if absolute rule is this arbitrary power to the prince to decide to to benefit who he wishes or makes decision, and not be subject even to his own decisions, to say, well, I made this up, but I changed my mind, I'm going to do it this way. um, Arbitrary rule. Well, then if you're under arbitrary rule, you're in, remember, back to the state of war, and which is again, there's no authority to appeal to. No, in the state of war, there's no legitimate authority to appeal to, but only yourself in that sense. So back, you're in the state of civil society. Now I want to check something. I think, yeah, this is that. This is a note. This is where they obey here. It's a footnote. In this edition, the notes are within the body of the text, not in a footnote. This is from Hooker. This thing that they obey, right? That thing is here, and this is Hooker. He's quoting from Hooker. This is a footnote to that. That's where everyone in society has to obey, and that the public power of all society is above every soul contained in the same society, and the principal use of that power is to give laws unto all that are under it, which is, in such case, we must obey, unless there has been reason shown which may necessarily enforce that law of reason or of God doth enjoin the contrary. So Hooker, Encyclopedia, Ecclesiastical Polity, Book 1, chapters 1, section 16. So he's this note doesn't end it. It ends the note there. The chapter ends with this here about that the prince that the absolute prince in respect who are under his dominion. Now, next thing, section 91. For being supposed to have both legislative and executive power in himself alone, there is no judge to be found. No appeal lies open to anyone who may fairly or indifferently and with authority decide, and from whose decision relief and redress may be expected of any injury or inconvenience that may be suffered from the prince or his order, such that a man, however entitled, czar or grand seigneur, or how you please, is as much in the state of nature with all under his dominion as he is with the rest of mankind. For wherever any two men are, having no standing rule or common judge to appeal to on earth for the determination of controversies of right between them, they are still in the state of nature. Um, and now this is this right here. This is another quote here. Hooker, all this Hooker right here. Here is in relation to this a state of nature, and under the inconvenience of it, with only this woeful difference to the subject of either slave of an absolute prince, whereas in the ordinary state of nature he has a liberty to judge his right and according to the best of his power to maintain it. Now, whenever his property is invaded by the will and order of the monarch, he has not only he has not only no appeal, as those in society ought to have, but he is but as if he were degraded from common state of rational creatures, is denied a liberty to judge of or defend his right, and is so exposed to all the miseries and inconvenience that a man can fear from that a man can fear from one who, being in an unrestrained state of nature, is yet corrupted with flattery and armed with power. So, in other words, absolute rulers, absolute monarchs are basically it's worse than being in the state of nature. It's actually in the state of war. That when you're in the under the under, in, living under an absolute monarch who is not obliged by the rule, this is actually like being in the state of war in that sense. It's in the state of nature, but it's also in that state of war. This is the Hobbesian war against all. So, so now let's look at the footnote to Hooker here. The takeaway is this is what he says. They shall still in a state of nature, right? To take away all such mutual grievances, injuries, and wrongs, such as 10 men in the state of nature. There was no way but by growing into compulsion and agreement amongst themselves, by ordaining some kind of government public, and by yielding themselves subject thereunto, that until whom they granted authority to rule and govern, by them the peace, tranquility, and happy state of the rest may be procured. Men always knew that where force and injury were offered, they might be defenders of themselves. They knew that however men may seek their own commodity, yet if this were done with injury unto others, it was not to be suffered by but by all men, and all good means to be withstood. In other words, such conditions of that situation knew that such commodity, they may seek of their own comedy, and if were done injury unto others, this was not to be suffered by all men, but uh, and by all good means to be withstood. Now, you should do as much as possible to fight it, not do it. Right. Finally, they knew that no man might, in reason, take upon him to determine his own right, and according to his own determined process and maintenance thereof, in as much as every man is towards himself, and them whom he greatly affects, partial, and therefore that strifes and troubles would be endless, except they gave their common consent, all to be ordered by some whom they should agree upon, without which consent there would be no reason that one man should take upon him to be lord or judge over another. Ecclesiastical Polity, Book 1, Section 1, Chapter 1, Section 10, right? This is, again, a quote from this is apparently this is the quote from Hooker, which is, again, this is a very Christian Aristotelian argument. I would like to see, I mean, if we studied Hooker, I think I would like to see what Hooker actually says about society and community in this regard. Um, it is a major thing. Now he goes, for he thinks that absolute power purifies men's blood and corrects the baseness of human nature, but reads needs read. In other words, he who ever thinks that absolute power purifies men's blood and corrects the baseness of human nature needs read but the history of this or any other age to be convinced to the contrary, that he would have been insolent and injurious in the woods of America would not probably be much better in a throne, or where perhaps learning and religion shall be found out to justify all that he shall do to his subjects, and the sword presently silences all those that dare question it. For the protection of absolute what the protection of absolute monarchy is, what kind of fathers of their countries it makes princes to be, and what a degree of happiness and security it carries civil society, where this sort of government is grown to perfection. He that will look into the late relations of Ceylon may eat Ceylon, parts of India like that, may easily see. In other words, madness and horrible. An absolute monarchy, indeed, as well as other governments of the world, The subjects have an appeal to the law, and the judges to decide any controversy and restrain any violence may happen betwixt the subjects themselves, one amongst the other. This everyone thinks is necessary and believes he deserves to be thought a declared, in other words, deserves, in other words, he believes deserves to be thought a declared enemy to society and mankind, who should go about to take it away. But whether this be a form, whether this be from a true love of mankind and society, and such a charity as we owe all one to another, there is reason to doubt. For there is no more than what every man who loves his own power, profit, or greatness may and naturally must do, to keep those animals from hurting or destroying one another, who labors and drudges only for his pleasure and advantage, are so taken care of, not out of any love the master has for them, but love of himself and the profit they bring him. For if it be asked, what security, what fence is there in such a state against the violence and oppression of this absolute ruler? The very question can scarcely, the very question can scarcely be borne. They are ready to tell. They are ready to tell you that it deserves death only to ask. They will. They are ready to tell you that it deserves death only to ask after safety. Betwixt subjects and subjects, they will grant there must be measures, laws, and judges for their mutual peace and security. But as for the ruler, he ought to be absolute and is above all such circumstances, because he has power to do more hurt than wrong. It is right when he does it to ask how you may be guarded from harm or injury on that side where the strongest hand is to do it is presently the voice of faction and rebellion, as if when men quitting the state of nature enter into society, they agreed that all of them but one should be under the restraint of law, and that he should still retain all the liberty in the state of nature, increased with power, and made licentious by impunity. In other words, the absolute ruler is kind of like the man in the state of nature, given all the power, but all the freedom, do what he wants. Now, wait a minute, do it as you want. Again, this is how, in other words, here he is presenting the absolute ruler in this Hobbesian fashion. Whoa, isn't that interesting? Is that right there? Made licentious with impurity. And to think that men are so, in other words, that in the state of nature is the state of liberty. In other words, in other words, that he should be retained, be restrained under the should be under restraint of law, but that he should retain all the natural liberty in the state of nature, increase with the power and made licentious by impunity. In other words, he can't be touched. This is to think that men are so foolish that they take care to avoid what mischief may be done them by polecats or foxes, but are content, nay, think it safety to be devoured by lions. They will, in other words, they will take care to take these little animals, but not to be devoured by lions. So good at this again. So he has this wonderful point: is that, well, there's something. No, no. If we're going to create society, we want everyone to be under it. Now, and I'm sorry, even the king or the ruler must be under the law as well. That if there are absolute rulers outside the law, then there is no society. There's no civil society, and therefore it's actually worse than the state of nature in the sense that you have this person who has all the freedom and authority of the state of nature, well, everyone else doesn't. But then, because of this impunity that we have no control over what he does, or it does, is like a lion who can take and do what he wants. But wait a minute, I thought the state of nature wouldn't do that. But again, this is why there's inconsistency in Locke. That Locke here seems to be giving us the state of nature that is more attuned to Hobbes's version of this absolute do what one wants, right? 94. But what flatterers may talk or assume public people's understand. But what flatterers may talk to amuse people's understandings. It hinders not men from feeling. And when they perceive that any man, in what station soever, is out of bonds of civil society, which they are of, and that they have no appeal on earth against any harm they may receive from him, they are apt to think themselves in the state of nature, and in respect of him whom they find to be so, and take care as soon as they can to have that safety and security in civil society for which it was first instituted, and from which only they entered into it. In other words, they entered into it for safety and security. And therefore, in other words, therefore the prince is like this. Is therefore, wait a minute, we've formed civil society to escape that situation. So let's go back to civil. Okay. Let's all of us agree to make war against the prince. Okay, right? Um, and therefore, though perhaps at first, as it shall be shrewd more at large hereafter in the following parts of this discourse, some one good and excellent man having gotten a peremptory preeminency among the rest, had this defense paid to his goodness and virtue as a kind of natural authority, that the chief rule with arbitration of their differences by the tacit consent devolved into his hands, without any other caution, but the assurance they had of his uprightness and wisdom. Yet, when time given authority, and as some men would persuade us, sacredness of custom, which the negligent and unforeseeing innocent of the first ages began, had brought into succession of another stamp, the people finding their properties not secure under the government, as then it was, whereas government had no other end but the preservation of property. Right? Again, this is that. Again, these are the two things. Um, Again, this is that first part here goes to that. Let's talk about this. Let me stop here and we'll turn to it. So, and this little thing is property. It goes at first when certain kinds of regiments at once were appointed. It may be that nothing was of them farther thought of maintain for manner of government, but all permitted until their wisdom and discretion, which were to rule, till the experience they found this for all parts very inconvenient, so as the thing which they had devised for a remedy did indeed become uh, uh, did indeed but increase the sore. In other words, they caused the problem, right? Which it should have cured. They saw that to live by one man's will became the cause of all man's misery. This constrained them to come unto laws, wherein all men might see their duty beforehand, and know the penalties transgression them. Book Ecclesiastical Polity, Book 1, Chapter 1, Section 10, again. So therefore, again, this is this idea that the purpose of this is protect his property. But Hooker goes beyond that. So this idea that Hooker's argument seems to be that um, uh, arbitrary rule is bad in that sense that this is a good. In other words, it's a stabilizes. It's not really. We came for the stability in this thing. This is instability here for this, and therefore this is creating. In other words, one man's will it became the cause of all man's misery. Right. This constrained them to come unto laws, wherein all men might see their duty beforehand and know the penalties of transgression. This idea of that's Hooker's account. So back to this thing, right? Is it as then it was, as we're over property, could ever be safe nor at rest, nor think themselves in civil society, till the legislature was placed in collective bodies of men, call them Senate, Parliament, or whatever you please, by which means every single person became subject, equally with equally with others, the meanest, the meanest men, to those laws which he himself, as part of the legislature, had established. No one, nor could anyone, by his own authority, avoid the force of the law when one once made, nor by any pretense of superiority plead exemption, whereby to license his own, or the miscarriages of any of his dependents. Period. So, and that goes to the second part, right? Civil law, being the act of the whole body politic, doth therefore overrule each every part of the same body. In other words, that the civil law by party, that in other words, no part is above the law. And that's okay. In Ibid, this is ecclesiastical polity, book 1, section 10. Again, this is why this section is very key. Um, no man in civil society can be exempted from the laws of it. For if any man may do what he thinks fit, and there be no appeal on earth, or redress or security against any harm he shall do, I ask whether he be not fit, he be not perfectly still in the state of nature, and so can be no part or member of that civil society, unless anyone will say the state of nature and civil society are one and the same thing, which I have not yet found anyone so great a patron of anarchy to affirm. So, in other words, this is interesting. Locke seems to argue that if this, the argument against monarchy seems to also be the argument that, wait a minute, they're in the state of nature. They're absolute monarchy, or at least absolute rule is basically still in the state of nature. And the state of nature is not good. Men need to escape it. Why? But if it's so good originally, why did you need to escape it? But it's not so good. It has a defect. That defect is every man is a judge of his own thing, and every man is left to himself, and therefore this leads to this inconvenience. But then Locke would even say that in the state of nature, this is better than being a slave in civil society. Not a slave, not in civil society, but in the reign of an absolute ruler, because you're even denied the right of self-help in that sense and appeal, right? So Locke seems here to be very, almost kind of embracing a Hobbesian view of the state of nature, being so bad that we want to escape it. And therefore, the absolute rule is so bad because it produces the chaos that you find in this Hobbesian state of nature, and that we create civil society to escape that from. Therefore, we flee from. In other words, there's no, and that there can be no civil society from anyone who's above the law. Now, this is a very important question. If you have a situation where people are above the law, are not subject to law, are immune to it, then there's no civil society. See the implication there? That the idea that Hillary Clinton can get away with something, or Biden's son is not subject to law. That people, because of whatever, is not subject to law. Then, wait a minute. Then civil society breaks down. Even in Poland, there's cases where people stand up and don't abide by the law. Well, if you don't obey the law, and there's not punishment for that, real vicious punishment for it, and if that you're so, in other words, no one can be above the law. No one can be above the enforcement of law. All are equal under the law. This is civil society. Civil society requires that no one be above the law. No one be above that is more powerful than the law. If anyone who has enough power or impunity from the law, then there is no the civil society there is no civil society in Locke's understanding. So let's stop here. This is where it ends. If you have any comment, questions, please put it below. If you like what you did, like it. If didn't like it, you can say no. Say why, what's wrong. If you comments, criticisms, I'll respond when I see them. Um, Share this if you liked it and want someone to share do this. Tell a friend, join, subscribe, get them to subscribe. You can follow me on social media. The information is below. If you want to help me out doing some more of these and find, kind of contribute, you can do so by through Subscribe Star or Patreon, or you can just buy my, if you say this in my prescriber, you want to buy my book, buy the book. You can buy it by Lulu. It's called, let's just see that it's called A Notebook on Aristotle's Politics. I've read another book, but I won't get this money from them. I have two other books. This is my little project to get some money, little money in my pocket. That helps me do this. Buy computers, buy more books, so I can read things, keep myself up to date, and understand these things. Oh, I look at the library. Someone said I should do the show of the library, which I probably will. That's it. I would like to say, have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow soon when we go next chapter 8, which deals with, as it says here, the beginnings of political society. Take care. Bye.